Hi, my name is Ben. I'm a co-founder and the CTO of Mastery Portfolio. This video is the second video in a series about setting up your MasteryBook account. The first video is all about mastery levels, and there are some important concepts that I discussed in that video. If you haven't watched it yet, and especially if you're new to standards-based grading, you'll want to check that out first. Otherwise, in this video, we're going to be talking about the narrative that you want to tell about student learning. This is all done in the input section, which is a subsection of mastery levels. So again, you won't be able to follow this tutorial if your mastery levels aren't already set up. Assuming they are, let's go ahead and take a look at what you can do next. And by the way, if you're feeling at all lost as I talk about mastery levels and the student learning narrative, it might be a good time to stop and just reach out to us, and we'll see what we can do to help you implement standards-based grading at your school. Anyway, let's go ahead and move forward with the tutorial. I'm going to open this tutorial where the last one left off, in the Mastery Levels section of the Manage tab. And in the last tutorial, the big question we were addressing is, how do you identify student learning? So at this point, I've only partially answered that question. I can say that we identify student learning using 5 mastery levels, and that we use 2 distinct mastery levels to identify when a student has reached a secure level of achievement. So I can click into each one of these, and you can see if you've watched the previous tutorial that I have changed the descriptions down here, but I've actually gone and added a little bit more, because just having 5 mastery levels and 2 secure levels doesn't adequately address the question of how you identify student learning, because student learning is a narrative, and that's really the point of this tutorial. And to foreshadow a little bit, we won't fully answer this question until we've gone into the content for the next tutorial, in which we're going to talk about the organization of learning. But for now, let's take a look at what's possible to enrich our picture of student learning. So in addition to changing these mastery levels, I've also opened an account that has access to sample data. And I want to be clear, for you who are following along the tutorial, you don't need to have sample data. It's only being used for the demonstration in this video. And I'm about to jump into that sample data soon, but before I do, I want to point something out to you. Take a look at one of these mastery levels, and you'll notice there's a section called Input. Now, I left this out in the previous video, and perhaps you are wondering, well, what does input mean? You can see that for the proficient mastery level, the input is P and the color is green. So keep that in mind as I jump over into the MasteryBook and show you some sample data. Okay, this may appear a little overwhelming, but this is essentially a standards-based gradebook. We have several sample students along the left side, and across the top we have the names of several assignments. Now, some of these assignments have already been scored, and some of them are left empty. And you can see that anywhere where there's a P, that corresponds to a proficient understanding of that standard. But there's a little bit more to that. Some of these have comments, like this one here. It says that this was achieved during tutoring. So maybe that means the student came in and worked with the teacher after school in order to be scored on this. Or another one here, this student has achieved mastery, but they didn't submit the assignment on time. And there's even a tag in the top corner that says that this assignment was late. In fact, there are several options for different tags that can be assigned to any score. Now, in many traditional gradebooks, the way that you would add a comment or a tag is you would enter the score inside the cell, and then you would go up to the top and you would write some comment. So this assignment was late, for example, and I might tag it as late. Okay. But what the MasteryBook does, in order to provide teachers tools to create a better understanding of progress in a classroom, is they build this into the inputs. So for example, if I wanted to do the exact same thing in less time, I might just write PL. And you can see as soon as I typed L, it wrote late submission, and over here it tagged it. And it even has a different color to help me visually see which assignments have been late. So how is that set up? That's really what we're going to look at in this video. I'm going to go back into the Manage tab and go under Mastery Levels, and we'll go into the Proficient Mastery level. And the P here corresponds to the base input. So anything that's P is proficient. But if you click on Advanced Settings, this gives you more detail about the student's performance or their achievement. So I've given two alternative inputs, PL for late submission, which you just saw, and then I have another one here, PT, to represent that the student achieved this during tutoring, and that doesn't have a tag. To show you this being used, I'll just type PT. And there's the comment up at the top. So what's the whole point? Well, clearly this is a time-saving procedure. It just helps teachers. But there's a little bit more than that, because whenever assignments are tagged, you can actually use this information to generate certain reports. So for example, over here, there is a rating called insufficient evidence. And whenever work is not even submitted, we can add the missing tag. Whenever I generate a report, I'm going to look briefly at the Reports tab. We have a report module called Late and Missing Assignments, where we can actually generate a report for students, pass it out, and it'll list all of the assignments where students have late or missing work. And as the MasteryBook develops with time, we'll add even more modules to create a more comprehensive picture of how students are performing in school. And then there's one more reason why this is very important. It's often the case that when students submit late work, teachers will mark that student down and take away points from the student's overall grade for the work being late. The problem with this isn't that there shouldn't be some sort of consequence when a student doesn't submit work on time, but that taking points off of a grade isn't an accurate picture of a student's learning. It's really just a picture of the student's discipline when it comes to timeliness. And it should be delineated between when a student really doesn't understand something and when a student has turned in something late. That's what we're endeavoring to accomplish in adding these narratives in the MasteryBook. Now, you might be thinking that a tag is an insufficient result for a student who consistently turns in late work. And if you are thinking that, we'll talk more about creating an accurate picture of student development when we talk about the organization of learning in the next video. But for now, I want to be clear that that's one of the purposes of adding these custom inputs. And then before we move away from this section of the Manage tab, I want to talk about a few more things that you should be aware of. So the first of those things is, what happens if you change this value here? Let's suppose instead of it being a P, we make it an S. Now this is going to have a consequence. If you jump back over to the MasteryBook, you can see that all of the P's are now red or a pink color to indicate that these entries are invalid. That does not affect the student's score. If you look on the left, these bars represent how the student is achieving, and their achievement is not taken away, but by changing the inputs, it does create this invalid appearance on the gradebook. So really, once you've decided on what your mastery levels are, you want to keep them the same, because that's going to impact the entire school. So I put it back to P, and you can see that they're all valid again. Secondly, I want to be clear that as of right now, these custom variations are specific to the individual teacher. And we found that from the schools that we work with, teachers like the flexibility to customize the type of feedback that they're giving students. So on a school-wide level, this is universal. Once you've decided that there are 5 mastery levels is it. However, teachers are allowed to add this customization. So if you're an administrator, this lower section, the section called Custom Variation Shortcuts, is something that you want to prepare your teachers to do, because any changes you make down here are not going to affect every mastery book in the entire school. And then lastly, there's one more thing that you can alter here, and that is the weight. Weight is an accommodation we provide so that schools that are transitioning from a traditional system into standards-based grading still have a way to translate their new assessment into an old system. And by old system, I'm specifically speaking of a percentage score. You can see if I look at all 5 of these levels, the mastery level has a weight of 100, so does proficient, and then yellow here, which stands for approaching proficiency, has a weight of 75. What that means is these are all percentages. If a student has approaching proficiency on a certain standard, then that's going to count as 75% of the score. And if they have not yet proficient, that's going to count as 25% of the score. Whereas anything that's secure is 100% score. Now, that's what I'm using in this example. You don't have to use these numbers. If you'd like, you can make it be 90%. But then what will happen is if you jump over into the mastery book, you can click on this bar, and the very first option is a mastery ratio. This represents the percentage of standards that are secure. So this student, Allison, is secure on 71% of all of the standards. If I click it again, I see 86. And this is the mastery rating. And there's a little helper text. It says, the mastery rating reflects a weighted score based off the most recent scores in each standard. So that means it's suggesting that the student would have the equivalent of an 86% on their grade if you were translating this into a traditional system. They would get 100% for all of the M's. They would get 90% for all of the P's, and so on. I think it was 75% for the yellows and 25% for the pinks. So the thing to do here is to find weights that are agreeable for the culture and the environment at your school that makes sense to students. And really, this is something that's useful for transcripts that depend on a percentage-based system. Although we know that with the mastery book, we can provide much richer detail than simply a number. If you'd like to explore more about what's possible to present students, you can check out the Reports tab, or you can even check out the Student View tab, which simulates what a student would see if he or she were to log in and view their progress in your class. So that's it for the Mastery Levels section of the Manage tab. In the next video, we'll talk about organizing learning and how to set up the standards at your school.